Great lawyers don't always know how to build great law firms. Let's change that. Join Ben Gideon as he shares hard-won lessons from building his own financially successful law firm and practical insights from top law firm entrepreneurs, business consultants, and more. This is a podcast for lawyers, by lawyers. Welcome to Elawvate. Build and grow your law firm. Produced and powered by Law Pods.
Elawvate, Build and Grow Your Law Firm is sponsored by Supio. Supio is a cutting-edge AI program designed specifically for plaintiff trial lawyers. I have to say, I did their demo just the other day. It is a fantastic product. It does so many things well, but one of the things I was just blown away with is the way it creates medical bill summaries that have been the bane of the existence of paralegals and plaintiffs' firms for decades. It does it in seconds. It's able to identify every bill from every provider, organize it, and then identify records where there's a bill but no record, and it can keep that going throughout the life of the case. It can do a million other things, which we'll talk about as we go forward, but you should get on Supio. They just got their Series B funding. They've got 60 plus employees. It's a great business, and get on and do the demo and see what they can do for you if you're in a plaintiff's practice. We're also brought to you by Vision Spark. Vision Spark is the search firm that specializes in finding your law firm, someone like Jeff Wright. We used Vision Spark to find our COO, and I've got to tell you, it was an incredibly good process. So I can talk from the side of the business owner who's searching for a COO. What was the process like from your side, Jeff, as the person being recruited?
It was thorough. It was. I felt at times I was being interrogated, and it was a long process, but it was probably the most thorough process I've been through in my career. And their follow-up, even since I've been hired, we've had monthly calls, and they just want to follow up. And I think the way they put it was, we want to make sure we didn't sell you a bill of goods, Jeff. We want to make sure everything we told you was correct, that it was a good fit. What made it a good fit? What did we do right? What did we do wrong? And I think you couldn't ask for more in a search firm.
Yeah, and I think, we obviously made the right choice in hiring you, but they found just an amazing pool of really top-notch candidates, which, you were the best of, Jeff, which speaks to you. But they found people we never could have located on our own, people from different states, people with extraordinarily interesting backgrounds. The expense was actually worth its weight in gold. So I would highly recommend, if you're looking for an implementer or a COO, I think they can also do some other positions, but I would reach out and talk to the folks at Vision Spark. And finally, the podcast today is brought to you by 1% for Planet. Our firm, when we started, committed ourselves to joining 1% for Planet. 1% for Planet is an organization where members like ours commit to giving 1%, in our case, of all of our fee revenues to environmental nonprofit organizations. It's been a wonderful fit for us. We've probably contributed to 24 really great organizations that help preserve the environment, particularly in the northern New England states where we practice. It allows us opportunities to attend events like the one you just went to, Jeff.
Yeah, it's an organization down in southern Maine that is a refuge for injured wild animals, and they try and rehab them, and the ones that are unable to be rehabilitated to a point that they can go back to their natural environment, they house them there, and they use them as to teach classes and teach children. They've rescued somewhere in the neighborhood of 6,000 injured wild animals in the last 5 to 7 years. It's an extraordinary organization.
Yeah, and it's just so great to be able to support all these organizations. And when you are a member of 1% for Planet, one of the cool things is you're authorized to use the 1% logo, and we do. It's on our it's part of our branding as a firm. It's on all of our digital marketing. It tends to be on our it's on our letterhead. I mean, when we submit a brief to the court, it's got the 1% for Planet logo on it. And I just think it's a nice thing to have your business associated with something positive like that, to send a message to the world that you are giving back. And we would encourage all law firms that have the means and interest to contact 1% for Planet and become members. And if you do that, please reach out to us and we will give you a plug on the show as a new 1% for Planet member.
Welcome, everyone, to the Elawvate, Build and Grow Your Law Firm podcasts. We have with us today Ben Gideon, as always, owner, partner, myself, Jeff Wright, Chief Operating Officer, Gideon Asen. And today we are joined by Andrew Garza, attorney and co-founder of Claggett, Sykes Garza LLC out of Connecticut. Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning.
Hope I got all that correct there.
You did. Thanks.
Perfect. How are you this morning, Ben?
Oh, I'm doing well. Just got in out of the rain, so we need a little rain here. It's the first rainy day we've had in about 3 months, from what I can tell. So,
yeah,
highly unusual for weather here in the state of Maine.
Yeah, we don't have a drought at the firm though. We're everyone's hitting on all cylinders, as busy as hell. We got trying to set our fourth quarter goals. Ben is in up to his neck in trial prep, with a trial coming up in 2 weeks. And we're lucky enough to have a podcast today with Andrew. So everything's good.
Plenty to do, as usual.
Plenty to do.
Well, that's a good segue. So the last time we had Andrew on, we were talking about a trial that he had done where they got a record-setting, I can't even remember now, like $100 million verdict or something in Connecticut. And it was a really fascinating case. But we're back on now, not to talk trial strategy, but I do recommend you listen to our sister podcast and listen to that episode because it was terrific. Now he's here to talk about building law firms. So Andrew, I know you built a very successful firm there in Connecticut. You since have decided to move on from that and you're starting a new venture. So let's just jump right in. People who are interested in the business side of law firm growth, building a firm, tell us a little bit about the backstory of where you've been and what insights that's given you into this issue.
Yeah, well, thank you both so much for taking time out of your busy schedules, trial and otherwise, to have me here. It's a pleasure to be back. So, my journey, I was realizing my sort of entrepreneurial journey began back in September of 2013, so a little over 12 years ago. I had been clerking and did some insurance defense for a blink, and then just decided I wanted to open my own practice. I had taken a class in law school and put together a business plan, and it seemed like a sort of faraway pipe dream. And then I got to a point where I was really just unhappy with insurance defense work and kind of thought, look, if this is what legal practice says, I think I've made a mistake. Really, I just... Shocking.
Right.
It has a way, it's sort of like a crucible, it's like, I think some of the, I don't want to say the best plaintiffs lawyers, that sounds self-aggrandizing, but a lot of plaintiffs lawyers come from insurance defense and they find they kind of like the work, but not that side of the V. So, I told my wife, I didn't tell her, that's not how that works. I said, hey, I'd like to leave this salary job and start a law firm. And very reasonably, she said, well, that's great, but how are we going to pay our bills? And so I said, oh, look, I'll go back to bartending. Hung my own shingle, found what used to be a filing cabinet in my first office, and went back to bartending 6 nights a week. And that was probably one of the most exhausting times of my life. Sort of, it's hard to answer the phone when you're slinging cocktails at late at night, but was able to kind of work myself out of that in about 6 months and continued to build a solo practice for a number of years. And then about 2017, 2018, joined with a partner and built Connecticut trial firm in Glastonbury and grew that firm into a sort of a firm of about 25, 30 folks. And like Ben said, we had some good trial successes, which I'm very grateful for our team that's still here with us, and kind of hit in, I think what most would say would be like a vision or an ideological crossroads where it was, where do we want to go from here? seen a lot of your other podcasts, talk about vision, and I just think it's important. And I think one of the things that, at least about me, I'm kind of boring in that I have I think a sense of who I am and what I want to do with the law practice. And I am inflexible that way in terms of, the way we want to handle cases and what we want the work to look like. And I think you're the same in terms of, your firm works every case up fully for every client. And that just, you can't run a volume practice and do things that way. It's just not sustainable. So we kind of hit a place where, it's like, do we go in this direction where we're engaging in more mass marketing, or do we, stay and kind of balance this sort of digital marketing, referral network, teaching, trial practice approach to marketing. And my goal was always not to have like the largest firm, but to, build very sustainably and build a firm that really focuses on doing good legal work for each client. As opposed to the most number of clients. If we can do both and that works and people aren't going crazy and the place isn't on fire, so be it, but it's got to be sustainable. It's like if our foot's on the gas, our hands have to be on the wheel. And so kind of hit a place where, visions diverge, which can happen. And I think that's sort of one of those things that's important to know too about a relationship, is there are sort of seasons for people too, and was very, very fortunate. I've known Sean Claggett out in Vegas and Mac Ronda and Will Sykes for over a decade, and they have their own firm, Claggett and Sykes, out there. And when we got to this place, it was a little different than when I had first started, when it was just me and I could bartend, and a little bit easier. Now I've got 3 kids, I've got a lot of different responsibilities, not to mention, 22 employees. And, so, we kind of decided, look, let's build, everybody wanted to come with me, came with me, and we built a new firm. And I think sort of the most important thing for me in that process, and I think I saw that you had a similar experience, was like, if I'm going to do this again, it's got to be the right fit, and it's got to be, like the vision up front, clarity on what the firm is, where it's going. And, that was an immediate fit with Sean, Matt, and Will. That's the firm they've built in Vegas, that very successfully, that focuses on doing excellent trial work. But I think what a lot of folks may not see necessarily, but those of us lucky enough to sort of work with Matt Ronda behind the scenes, is just how good they are on the business side too. It's sort of like the quiet giant over there. They run a really, really efficient systems-based business. And so it was a really, really great culture fit to meet people who wanted to, go into business together and build a new firm here, have all of our folks come over and, build the firm we've always wanted, and to sort of maintain the vision. So I know it's kind of a lot, but that's sort of how I got from there to here. And basically, CSG, Claggett, Sykes Garza, founded in May of 24. So going on about a year and a half, and a lot more of my time these days is spent on law practice growth and management than trial work, but it's getting closer to a balance than it was a couple years ago. And I'm happy to do it, happy to be here.
Yeah, that raises a lot of questions that I have for you. But so going back to, before we get into Claggett, Sykes and Garza, you built that prior firm, Connecticut trial firm, for, I don't know, the better part of a decade or so, and built it up to 20 or so employees. And then you made the choice to transition to this new business. So in a sense, you get to start again on a somewhat clean slate, although you're bringing a number of people over that I guess you believe fit into your new firm business model and culture. So what are the things that you want to leave behind? What are the things that you learned from doing your first venture that you didn't like and that you want to change?
I think I've seen a lot of your guests talk about the importance of systems, and, it's easy, I think, to pay lip service to systems, and it's not easy to develop them. But when you do develop them and they are a product of deliberation, they really don't matter if you're not going to follow them. And they're particularly hard to follow when you're under the gun, or you're under resourced, or like you guys are gearing up for trials. And that's sort of where the rubber meets the road. If you're if you're willing to deviate from your systems in those times of sort of most pressure, then what's the point in having them? So, I'm sort of inflexible about, we're flexible about the systems development process, but I am uniquely inflexible about, implementation. That comes to even people that I know. If it's someone that I know that is a friend, or that maybe wants to work here, or they go through the same hiring system as everybody else, there's no exceptions. And so if something would be disqualifying for an outside candidate, the same is true for them. So it's just, definitely not just saying that you have systems, but following them no matter what is the hardest thing to do. And that's really important to us here. And I think, for me, like, culture is really important. And I think we all agree on that. But culture, I think, to make it work, I think that's where most of the conflict is, and the hardest decisions usually live. And it requires work and action. I mean, if you have to fire somebody who is a really high performer, you have to do it. I mean, they're going to take down your employees, your culture. And if you're not willing to make the hard choices, even when, again, it's painful. I mean, it's painful to fire a high performer, but if you don't recognize long-term, number one, that makes you a hypocrite if you espouse, a positive work culture and that person's causing folks difficulty. And I'm not speaking about anybody in general. I'm just saying you have to be willing to let go of people who are making you money and who can do good legal work if they're creating problems within your work culture and they're just not consistent with your values.
We've certainly seen that to be the case. Let me ask you about systems, because I think people throw around the word systems is kind of in vogue, I think, and
Yep.
a lot of lawyers like to talk about systems. But one of my questions about that is what specific systems and who are those systems designed to manage? Because, I'm just reflecting on this actually last night. I think I mentioned in one of the early podcasts that one of my processes, I listen to a lot of business books, and then I jot down notes as I'm listening that I think if something has relevance to our practice. And I was listening to one yesterday driving around in the car. It's a great book I recommend by John Doerr, who is one of the earliest investors in Google and on the board of Google, and also was an early employee at Intel. And he wrote a book it's called Measure What Matters. It's about something called OKRs, which are objectives and key results, which are similar to KPIs, but a little bit more developed. And it's what Google and Intel have used to run their business and many other successful companies. But one of the things he talks about in there is systems and the unique challenge of managing professionals and the balance of having expectations and systems versus being overly prescriptive in a way that stifles innovation, motivation, creativity, and drive. And it actually reminded me of something we had been discussing in our office, where there was a question about whether to impose more rigid process-based systems on our attorneys, and we eventually backed down because our feeling was we want people to be highly motivated to be creative and to be innovative, and a good lawyer should not be overly managed. They also won't respond, a high level professional is not going to respond well to a check the box type of approach to a legal practice, nor do we want that. So while we do have a lot of systems in our office and we do have frameworks within which we expect our lawyers to operate, we try not to be overly paternalistic about it. And so I'm just curious, where do you see that balance in managing attorneys specifically? Because we have systems about intake and, paralegals, and those kind of jobs subscribe pretty well to systems-based approach.
Yep.
But when it comes to managing lawyers, it's a slightly different balance. So I'm curious what your thoughts are about that. Sorry for the long lead in, but I thought the context was useful.
It's a great question. I mean, it's the age-old question that we have in our firm of the balance between automation and systems and training, right? Do you err on the side of having 100 checkboxes in FileVine, or do you have 5 and make sure that you're training people on sort of what your expectations are and doing it that way? And that's actually one of the things we've left behind. I mean, we've kept a lot of the systems that we do have, but we've also we've gotten rid of a lot of checkboxes and collection of data for data's sake. And, for example, I mean, I did look at our intake systems and how lawyers were engaging with those too. And we had intake people collecting 20 different pieces of information, and they're not signing the clients. And I mean, it's affecting people hiring us. And I'm like, well, do we really need all 20 of those? Or can we get 3 and have them listen more and be present and develop that muscle, which I think is more important. And what I think we learned too with lawyers especially is you end up training out judgment when you do that, when you over systematize, because we have basically litigation chains that are built into our CRM where, the complaint goes out, we expect an appearance from the defense attorney, answers in 30, 60 days, right? All that stuff can be built in and automated, where it's even auto tasking the lawyers But then you just get task overwhelmed too, and they don't really know how to prioritize and where to start. And, if they have 300 tasks in their feed, they might as well have no tasks in their feed, because it's just, they don't know where to go. And people, I think that can burn people out. So we've kind of moved to a system of having more sort of checkpoints rather than everything getting auto tasked and auto assigned to lawyers. And we've had basically an internal Wikipedia forever that we host on Tetra. So it's we've maintained fundamental things like, look, if a case, depending on how long the lawyer's been here, we have there's a whole page on partner authorization for cases, right? So if you're learning how to value cases, have a meeting. Roundtable is a standard of care in our office, and you work with the partner to set authority on what you think is, but what should be recommended to the client. Go talk to the client. And, we're not inflexible. I mean, I don't know the case as well as each lawyer handling the case does. And if you need to deviate or there's some issue, come back to me. But, build in those conversations and that training and help them develop that sort of valuation muscle versus, I know a lot of firms just like, there's one person at the top who just does that for them. But when you do everything for people, they don't learn either. So I don't know if that answers the question, but we've sort of learned that the more systematized you can over systematize, then you end up training out judgment and discretion in the process, I think.
I want to circle back to culture a little, because when our hiring process, and we really tried to perfect it recently, probably over the last year or so, we probably focus more on a good culture fit than a skill set. I mean, obviously they need the appropriate skill set to come work here, but they could have the best resume on the planet, but if they're not going to be a good culture fit, we don't want them. And it sounds like you're a proponent of that. The other thing I noticed, just looking at your firm now, we realized that in order to have a good culture, we try and have people on site as much as possible and not have everyone remote, but also to, I guess, outsource as little as possible. They very easily could have done a fractional COO. Instead, they brought me in-house. We recently brought a marketing person in-house instead of using a third party. Looking at, kind of your employees, I mean, you have an HR person in-house, you have a chief operating officer in-house, you have a jury research in-house, intake coordinators. Can you just speak to kind of how your mindset is there? And it sounds on the surface similar to ours.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So just like you can over systematize, you can over delegate, over outsource, over fractionalize, if that's even a verb, things in your firm. And it's not that I'm not supportive of some of those things. I mean, we have some virtual assistants that we've had for many years that are in different countries that help support us, but we've sort of found that and we have folks in different states. I mean, we have an employee who is full-time remote from Minnesota, one in Alabama, one in Pennsylvania, and that's been wonderful for us. It's helped us sort of expand the talent pool that we can recruit from. It's a unique challenge. I think it's different, and especially now that we've come back to a lot of in-office work post-COVID. I do think those folks unfortunately miss out on a lot of the fun we have in the office here. We built a nice space that we're proud of. But yeah, I mean, we did bring those folks in-house, the HR folks, the COO, and I think you have to be in a place where you have that need. But especially for me, as someone who my passion lies in trial work. I mean, I love building a business. I do. I love challenges. I love learning new things. I like to know as much as I can about as many things as possible. But that's not always the best use of my time and the best way to grow a law firm long term. So bringing someone in, especially someone like Roy Wong, who's our COO, CFO at the moment, and then ultimately as we grow, that role probably ends up getting divided, right? But he's someone I've known for 2 decades, and he's not a lawyer, and those can be the best hires. Not necessarily, but I don't think a lot of folks, to some of the points on your prior shows, Ben, I mean, like, lawyers aren't necessarily, and actually just flat out aren't the best business people necessarily, right? So, I've known Roy, and I knew that he helped run divisions at the state of Connecticut and manage folks, and he's easily one of the kindest and smartest people I've ever met. And so being able to bring him in, and then he certainly had to learn sort of the legal industry specific aspects of the business, but he was a culture fit. He did have, the intelligence, the people smarts, the ability to sort of hit the ground running, because, him being able to relate to other people and manage others in a way and do it with, be direct, but be kind. That's hard, I think, for folks. He's better at it than I am, but having him in-house has been invaluable, because he and I work together very closely, but there's immense trust there, so that I know, like this past week, I was in court, full days preparing for a case headed to trial. And I know that if I leave, yeah, I can still connect with Roy in the morning or after work and, make sure they don't need anything directly from me. But I know that sort of someone's holding down the fort and things are going to keep running. Cases are going to still get dispersed and settle, right? So I don't know if that answers that, but yeah, having someone physically in the office that I can connect with, build that relationship with that I had and grow it and work together collaboratively has been huge for us.
Is one of your measures of success, kind of anecdotally, to get away from the day-to-day management and focus primarily on casework and trials, or is it always going to be a mix of both?
So my goal for myself?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think to some extent, the days of me as sort of 100% trial lawyer are gone, which I'm okay with, but I think it'll end up being a lot closer to like 90-10, where we get to a place where I'm having sort of high level calls like maybe you guys do. I think I heard in the morning to connect about sort of bigger things, or you're doing your quarterly meetings or your annuals and setting goals. But I mean, if you have the right people and they all know what direction, because they get a vote what the firm is headed in, and you're all aligned in terms of vision, there's no concern for me in sort of stepping back and letting them, do their own thing, even if it's different from me, which has been hard. It's been hard as a type A person and a person who has a hard time delegating, frankly. But yeah, my goal is to get back into doing more trial work, consulting, and I think I've been successful at that. I mean, certainly when, May 25th of 2024, I was 100% law firm builder. And I think now, conservatively, I'm probably 50-50, trial lawyer and that. And then my goal is to transition more into the legal work, speaking, training, sort of network building. And that's been possible by adding folks like Roy or having a managing partner like, Liz Fitzsimmons, who's a lawyer, which is I realize is a little different to have someone who's sort of a COO, CFO, but then also have a managing partner. But really, one person manages and oversees the legal work at a high level, and one person manages and oversees the business, the people, the processes, right? So it does end up working out. They work well. And part of that too is setting clear, roles and responsibilities, defining them, getting acceptance and buy-in, and kind of having people who are willing to respect boundaries and wait to be invited in, right? If to somebody else's territory too.
We kind of have, quote unquote, a managing partner over our litigation teams. We just don't call him that my partner. When I moved to more of the overall firm management level, agreed to take that responsibility over from me. So sort of the legal services manager, so to speak.
Need help on a complex personal injury or medical malpractice case? Gideon Asen accepts case referrals and regularly co-counsels with lawyers nationwide on high-value claims. The firm has recovered millions of dollars in cases that competitors turned away because they dig deeper. Ready to learn more? Email bgideon@gideonasenlaw.com to start the conversation. Gideon Asen shares fees as permitted by the laws of each state. Don't let complex cases overwhelm your practice. Elevate justice together with Gideon Asen.
I'm curious about, so in order to get to the point where you can delegate, the premise of your business, as is ours for the most part, is that we do value-added cases where we can bring our unique skills and values as trial lawyers to maximize value for our clients and at the same time maximize the income potential for our firm. In order to achieve that particular business model, you have to have really highly skilled and highly motivated lawyers. So talk a little bit about how you attract and retain lawyers who you are comfortable, you and Sean Claggett, because I know Sean to be, like you, a highly skilled trial lawyer. But you can't put yourself into the copier and replicate yourself and delegate trial duties to yourself. You have to delegate them to other people, right? So
yeah.
Talk about how you locate and retain high quality lawyers and keep people happy when you need to find people who can do that, who, come with their own set of problems, their own egos, their own expectations in terms of professional growth and financial compensation.
Yeah. So That's a great question.
Just a
I've
small
also,
issue, I know.
No, I know it. And on top of being an amazing trial lawyer, I think Sean's uncle, when we were first talking about partnering, said it best. Sean's also a person, they all are, Matt and Will, of unbending integrity. So, I mean, that's sort of one of the things that matters to us too in locating folks. But yeah, no, it's really hard to find good trial lawyers, folks that are a fit for our culture, that are a fit for the work that we do and the way that we do it. You know, if you are the person that kind of wants to turn and burn volume, I don't, that's great. Different strokes for different folks, right? But for us, it's like, you know, we thrive in the details on the cases and getting in and growing and learning and running the focus groups and running the data and, you know, knowing as much as possible about our cases. So really, you know, to be honest, the best folks I've ever found, the folks who've tried the $100 million case with me and everybody here, you know, weren't looking. They weren't looking for new jobs. And that's not to say we haven't found good people who were, but for some reason, I don't know if there's something about the mentality of being happy where you are, but being open to possibilities elsewhere.
So you're identifying them proactively and then reaching out, or how does that work?
Yeah. So let me basically we were gearing up for trial on that case, the Cruz case, in the fall of, I want to say 21. And, you know, just realize, look, this is the size of this case. I mean, it ends up being 3 weeks of selection, 3 weeks of trial. It's just can't ever do that with one lawyer. So we're undergunned, we're under-resourced. We need to find people. So, you know, I knew, you know, Alexa Mahoney is a fantastic trial lawyer. Andrew Ranks, fantastic trial lawyer. And Alexa, I'd known through, at that point, the Keenan Trial Institute College. And, you know, so similar values, similar approaches to trying cases. She tried a number of verdicts, and I just reached out and said, hey, we haven't met. I've seen some of your results. Not sure if you're looking. We are, and would love to have a coffee if you'd like. And so we ended up grabbing a coffee, and it ended up being a fit. Because a lot of times people, you know, number one, I mean, the worst things that happens is you build a little community, right? That's a great byproduct of those meetings, and, you know, build a referral partner either way. But she ended up coming to join us, and, you know, and then, you know, Andrew Ranks, I met when I did insurance defense work, and he's just someone I stayed in touch with. Like we had no normal pregnancies with any of our kids. They all had, you know, stuff prenatally, and they're great now. But I'll never forget, I hadn't even talked to him in years, and then out of the blue, you know, when we're going through like stuff with my son, I like a board game shows up, which was always his thing. He always liked board games, and it's just from him, just thinking about you guys. This was fun for my kids when they were that age, and it just, you know, that's the kind of person he is. And he wasn't looking either. You know, he was managing a satellite office for an insurance defense firm, and, you know, was making good money and was comfortable there. And, you know, I said, hey, any chance you're looking? He was like, not really. I was like, well, I have this awesome case, and we have a big, you know, great inventory, and I'd love to grab coffee if you just want to chat about it. So we did. And I think what helps too is having people who are honestly comfortable where they are, or maybe they're mostly comfortable. They don't need a job, because I think that engenders transparency and honesty. I mean, to your point about compensation, you're not going to find good trial lawyers who are good culture fits who are inexpensive, nor should they be. You know, you have to be willing to pay people what they're worth and value them, because they, you know, I do. I mean, I can't imagine our practice without them. And so, I mean, even with Ranks, I hope he's looking at me saying this, but it's like, even like negotiating salary, not talking about the amounts, but it was very open about, this is what I need. And I said, okay, well, look, I can't guarantee you I can do that, but I'll talk to my partner. You know, we have a policy that all hiring and firing made by agreement, and salary discussions, and I'll circle back. And then I circled back and I said, hey, we could do it. And then he gave his notice, and his boss came over the top, which, you know, puts you in a tough position, right? And, you know, on the one hand, he's in a position where he's like, well, why didn't you give me that raise before? But then, you know, it's also, again, understanding the value that people have. And so I'm glad he came back and talked to us, because some people might have ended the conversation, but he said, hey, look, honestly, I talked to my boss, they offered me more money. Now I'm conflicted. I want to join your firm. I like the people. I'm interested in doing that work, but that's where it is. And I said, well, look, I'm grateful you gave us the opportunity. I think some lawyers might, if you're a litigator, there's a tendency to be aggressive or offended. I'm not offended by people who want to be paid money to do. I mean, this is not a charity. They do have bills to pay, and culture is great. And it's really, really important, but it doesn't pay your mortgage. You also have to make money too. You have kids and you have responsibilities. So I'm grateful he gave us that opportunity. And I said, look, honestly, I don't know that I can go do that and match, but if we can, does that work for you? And he said, yeah. And we were able to make it work on our end, and he joins us, and Mahoney and Ranks and I tried that case, and sort of the rest is history. So you have to be willing to be open-minded. And just as many conversations as I've had like that have worked out, there are others that haven't. But maybe a couple years down the line with some of our folks, it's worked out this way too, where, you talk and you keep a dialogue going, and then, maybe 3 years later, the timing is right for them. So it has to be the right person, but it also has to be the right timing. And you can't be offended by if the timing's not right for them either, because frankly, if the timing's not right for them, you don't want them. We've made that mistake. You have pressures and they're the right person, but if it's the right person at the wrong time, it can't just be a fit for you. It's got to be a fit for them. And that's just not going to work out. So I think it involves a lot of patience. It does involve some proactivity. And I think again, our best people, I think we've found have all been folks who've had jobs that we've located and built relationships with, and they've come that way. But I know that's not particularly helpful for any listeners who have hiring needs right now. And we do post and we do hire that way too. But I think I think it's tough. It's hard.
No, I mean, I think that for listeners, I think the takeaway is that you want to hire good people. Most of those people are not currently unemployed out there, with their carpet bag walking around looking for a job. They are employed somewhere because they're valued. And if your hiring process only targets people that don't have a job, or, you're not going to find the highest and best quality people. And we've had the same experience. I mean, most of our lawyers, we targeted, they were working somewhere, we approached and brought them over. We've developed a different process too recently, which is that it was the process that led us to hiring Jeff, but it was being much more intentional about having a very detailed job description that was both indicated that the job was extremely demanding, but also inspirational in a certain way, and we thought would appeal to a certain cross-section of people and put our culture and our core values front and center. So the idea is that people are going to self-select. Anybody who applies for this job is going to, by definition, be a pretty good fit for us. And that's worked out reasonably well. And our recent attorney hire came through that kind of a process. But it was also somebody who had a job, a very high level job, and was not looking, but saw that job posting. And according to her, it spoke to her in a way that, inspired her to apply for a job, even though she wasn't actually looking. So maybe those are two different ways of going about it. But Andrew, just one final thing on the attorney hiring. You talked about hiring. What about retention? And You talked a little bit about financial compensation. We obviously aren't looking for any specific salary, but in terms of the balance between incentive-based compensation, bonus, participation in the upside of cases, because on the plaintiff side, this is a risk return business, right? And most people are in it because they want to appreciate some of the upside value of the results, but they're willing to take on a little bit of the risk of the downside. Can you talk a little bit about how you balance that and find a reasonable compensation plan that can achieve those goals, if that's how you do it?
Yeah. So I think in a nutshell, it's don't be greedy as a law firm owner. No, and I mean, and it really is. And culture also, again, it requires work. So I mean, it's easy for law firms to say, maybe it's not, maybe they don't, but like that. Look, we support you having a family, and we support you being present for your kids' activities, and because that's incredibly important to me. I mean, I've coached baseball every year of my son, my daughters, and being there at their games and being available to do that is important. But of course, if I'm not here, there's work that has to be done, and someone's got to do it. So there's a natural also stress that goes with giving people that flexibility. So you have to be willing to pick up that status conference for somebody who is going to their kids' play. So you can't tell people they can be present and then make it impossible for them to be present. So accept that that's going to cost you money and time, and again, put your money where your mouth is. Things like maternity leave. My trial buddy Alexa Mahoney just gave birth Saturday. Congratulations to her, Anna Lynn Mahoney. But it turns out when you have really amazing, capable trial lawyers and they go out on maternity leave, you can't just do it all yourself. they are in fact doing an amazing job and carrying a significant caseload. So you can pay lip service to supporting people and maintaining a place for them, but unless you're willing to understand that that comes with work, and she knows that, and she knows that we're not rushing her back. We're celebrating her and her daughter, but we're excited to have her back in January, whenever she's comfortable. But you have to be willing to understand that, okay, yeah, you've got to fill that gap, whether it's hiring an associate or, more of my time is spent on some of her cases and moving them forward. You have to understand that that's going to come with sacrifices, and they may fall on you as the owner of the firm to do it. And you have to be willing to take that with a positive attitude, because number one, the work has to get done, but number two, your attitude dictates people's comfort level with, doing those things. And if it feels like it's a little bit like, unlimited vacation, it's like, I think there's studies done on that where people actually take less because the culture just creates, it pressures them to not take it. So you have to have a positive attitude and believe it and live it and be willing to understand that it's going to take work and money to live those values and to create that culture that is going to make people feel like they can stay. Because unfortunately, a lot of people, particularly women that we've hired, have left firms because the firms have said they're supportive of that, but they're ultimately not when the rubber meets the road and they say, hey, I'm pregnant. And so that's important to us, actually, giving people the space to do that. And in terms of compensation, though, so that's a really great question. And it's one that we've wrestled with for years. In my former firm, we basically had an approach where you pay people on origination, but then we kind of let each individual candidate dictate what percentage of a base salary and what percentage of origination they wanted, or a percentage of the work that they did. So if you were a person who wanted a lower base salary but wanted a higher percentage of the work that you did, we tried that for a while. This isn't going to come as a shock maybe to you, or maybe Maine's built different, but very few people want to come work for you who have the same risk tolerance for contingency that you do. They really would like to be paid a higher base salary, which is tough as a law firm owner if you're managing cash flow at a PI firm. But, we gave people that. And, ultimately when we had shifted to like a pod model that had been recommended by like a 90 or an EOS implementer, and we were in the process of considering that. And the pod model, for folks that don't know, is essentially, dividing your folks out into teams. You have an attorney, maybe you have a paralegal under them, an assistant, at least 3 people, and then you kind of run each pod like its own business. And we were sort of considering that as a compensation structure. And then, what does that pod do for business, and offset by the salaries, and like how much it costs to market or originate those files, and what's the net profit, and sort of give that to each one. And, things kind of went the way they went with building the new firm. And I remember talking to Sean and Matt and Will, and like a lot of decisions we've made in our new firm, they're like, yeah, that was the worst decision we ever made. We've been there, done that, made that mistake. I'm like, great, thanks for saving us a few years of frustration. They're like, no, because what happens in that model is then people get resentful. A big case comes in and it goes to Ranks Pod versus Alexa Pod, right? And why I always feel like they get the bigger cases. And what's critical at our firm from a values perspective is collaboration. Like I grew up, the single mom in public housing and waited tables for 10 years. Like if the floor needs to get swept, I'm grabbing a broom. And if you're not the kind of person who can step in and fill trial binders because you're a trial lawyer and that's beneath you, yeah, we like to have systems and processes, and ideally we're ahead of that. But we had a trial during COVID where, the night before opening statements, the judge said, yeah, no, we actually are doing this new thing as of this moment where we need an exhibit binder for every juror. Because that's how we're going to do it. They have their own exhibits. You're like, all right, it makes sense, but I got to get 7 more binders by tomorrow morning. And it's just me and my paralegal. And that's, so I'm sitting there, we have this whole table spread out. We're stuffing exhibit binders. I've got A, you've got B. And that's our culture. Like we're not, maybe it's some aspect of the, hungry, humble, smart, like the ideal team player. But I think that is the person who we hire and look for. And I guess living your values too as an owner matters. Being willing to pick up a broom and do that, make coffee for your folks. But that's the longest way ever of saying, so we did not do the pod model. And I talked to Sean, Matt, and Will, and transparently, the model we have now is the model they have. And it's probably going to offend some people, but I actually love it. And so this is the controversial part. We don't pay our lawyers 1/3 referral fees on the cases they originate. So everyone's going to be like, well, that's ridiculous. Because if you don't do that, then what's the incentive for them to bring the case in? And why wouldn't they just send it everywhere else? Heard it, considered it, rejected it. And so ultimately, here's why. So if you do the pod model, people compete against each other. What Sean, Matt, and Will do, and what we've done and will do is we pay our lawyers a little bit less on the cases they originate, though they're still paid origination on cases they bring in. But what ends up happening is we look at the entire firm's net profit at the end of the year, and we take usually a fixed percentage of that, and that goes into a pool, and that gets distributed across the entire firm. I mean, we meet as a leadership team and we talk about that. And so the core principle there is everyone is benefiting from the success of the entire firm. So if I go out and I try a big case and we get a good result, the next time that happens, I don't have somebody else who, maybe works directly with ranks for the most of the time, but I say, hey, Kristen, I need help preparing stuff. Can you step in? And there's just our whole team attitude is a bias towards collaboration and support and like the overall result for the client. And I think the way you do that is by compensating people well and compensating them based on the success of the entire firm. So that when the firm's successful, they're successful. And it does mean, you give them, for a lot of people, I mean, it may be too much money. But I know, years where like people have been paid their whole year's salary and bonuses. And so that's how you keep, and then they also know, look, if the firm's a little bit slower, there's flexibility there. But, we compensate people very well. It requires you as an owner to not live a life of pod lifestyle where I want to have every single pod compete against the other and be maximum efficiency and be charging everybody for every postage stamp and piece of paper, within a pod, but compensating people based on the success of the firm has, I think, led to a culture that cares about and everyone rows towards the same success goal, if that makes sense.
It does. I mean, it's interesting to hear that because we grappled with a lot of those issues in developing our own compensation structure and plan. We ended up in a slightly different place, but the same considerations and issues that motivated you to develop the plan you have were all part of how we came up with the plan that we have. And I don't want to spend the inordinate time on that. I wanted to ask you about the business model of, you're plaintiff's practice, contingent fee.
Yep.
It sounds like you've made the decision that you're going to focus on attracting your high value work through a referral network as opposed to any direct to consumer marketing. That's the business model I lived under for 20 plus years. We've developed an extremely successful referral practice. However, we thought at some point we had hit a ceiling on what we could accomplish through that model. And we've augmented that now by exploring the direct-to-consumer marketing. We had never done it before, but we're actually up on TV now, and we've built out a whole unit in our practice to manage the intake and volume, but in a way that doesn't detract from or in any way dilute the efforts of the people that are handling our high value cases. So that was kind of the way we addressed that issue of not wanting to be a volume practice or dilute our resources that way. I'm curious as to, do you have a model or a vision that where you see the referral based practice able to scale to the point where you want to be? Do you have a ceiling on what that is in terms of case volume and numbers, and kind of what's the cost benefit on that issue in your view?
Yeah, so great question. So just to clarify too, so our marketing approach is not solely referral based, and I think particularly for so many reasons. The competition in the market has, I think, changed. You guys know how competitive it is, how expensive it is to advertise. But I think to your point, there is a ceiling. And beyond there being a ceiling, there's a lack of consistency. I think until you get to a place where, and Sean and Matt, they have different approaches for their firm out west, and but they have a different profile than we do. We take pride in the work we do, but they could probably subsist on an exclusively referral-based practice like others. And the question is really, what do you want for yourself? We're not there yet. And so we do balance, referral-based practices with digital marketing. We do have, we work with a company called the Search Engine Guys, TSEG, who manage, our website and all of our digital marketing. And we do spend money into that. And I think you kind of have to. I don't think you can. You certainly can only do a referral based practice, but to your point, it's going to be limited. It's going to have a capped ceiling. And for me as the person, and you all too who manage and see the finances in your firms, it's just the lack of consistency is a killer, because you know what your burn rate is. That was the hardest pivot for me as a law practice owner. And a contingency fee practice was agreeing to hire somebody who I knew I had to make payroll every 2 weeks, but contingency fee cases are unpredictable, but if you are keeping data, they are actually a lot more predictable than you think they are. So, I mean, we are tracking every case that comes in. We are tracking, how long cases take generally to resolve. There's no bias towards quick resolution. There's a bias towards efficient and maximum resolution for sure. But we know, look, if I can look year over year at our lead data, which we track and say, okay, for whatever reason, a sociologist can figure it out. August is a slower month usually. So, we have less leads this month. And so 18 months from now, we're going to need to, sort of plan for that and make sure we have enough cash on hand for those dips and troughs to sort of hedge, right? So I think keeping data allows you to plan ahead. And it also, I think, allows you to sort of keep your wits about you, because if you have a month where leads are down, you can tell your marketing people with some confidence, hey, look, let me show you the data from year over year. And like, lo and behold, the curves tend to track for whatever reason. I mean, some variation, and, it's summer months can be slower. And so, yeah, I think we do invest in our referral relationships. But I don't think you can do that alone. I think you have to have some sort of a digital strategy that goes with it if you do want to scale, like you're talking about. And if you're trying to manage resources, because that's sort of for me, I think one of the biggest challenges now is finding really good trial lawyers who are a fit for your culture. And so you can take all the cases in if you get them, but if you don't have good litigators, that can be tough. So one of the things we've done, which can be, it's also controversial, is like, if you take a case in, we have a really large pre-litigation department, and, maybe our litigation threshold has to change, temporarily or permanently, depending on resources if someone's out. And so, we're not afraid to refer cases out to trusted referral partners and change the litigation threshold, which I know can be like anathema to some people, that if you hire, they hire you. But if you have people you work with who you trust at other firms, you can manage that relationship successfully for the benefit of everyone. And again, don't be greedy. So, maybe you have to give up more of the fee to get the best result for them, but you're not hiring someone in a rushed way, or, stretching your firm and your people by piling more on them than they can handle in a moment, right? By just putting more into litigation and keeping cases that you really should be referring out for the client's benefit, honestly, if you're under-resourced.
Andrew, we have a very well-defined 4-year strategic growth plan, and we meet about it weekly. We have our quarterly meetings. We try to adhere to it. We see where we are, year to date, in terms of what our short-term goals were going to be. You're obviously in a growth firm. How are you managing that? Are you adhering to a particular strategic or growth plan, or I'm assuming you're not winging it?
Yeah, so not winging it, but definitely I think this is sort of supported by EOS and the 90 platform, because we follow sort of like a loose 90 format. It's not necessarily every week. We're not having the meetings just to have meetings, if it can just be a stand up or a message. But yeah, I think long-term planning is something you have to do, but the definition of long-term changes depending on where you are in your law firm foundation. So when we first started, long-term was 6 months, and then long-term became a year, and then finally get to a place where 4 years is the target, and you have some revenue goals, and maybe you have things you want to measure, whether they're KPIs or OKRs, like Ben said. And so we do planning, and we'll have a quarterly meeting and set goals for the quarter, maybe by year end that we want to accomplish. But we're looking generally at the moment about it within a year for a lot of our goals. So I think certainly you have to have a vision, but I think for anyone that's starting a law firm or who feels like they have to have it all figured out that far out that soon, I'm just not sure that's practical, because when you're in a growth phase like we are, and you are in a transition phase and you're building, there are just so many moving parts that I think you can drive yourself crazy trying to play the entire chess game before someone makes the first move. Some part of it is going to be reactive to the market, or maybe one of your best people just quits. So I mean, you can make plans, right? It's like the Einstein quote, right? You can make plans, then God laughs at them, or whatever the quote is. But reality is also here, and you have to acknowledge that life exists, and it's gonna always be there. And so yeah, our planning, we do plan, but maybe we set goals for the quarter. On the operational side, maybe it's, marketing side, it's let's have X amount of events per quarter. Let's do at least one referral relationship event. Let's do one client engagement event. Let's do, set targets for each quarter. Those can grow as your capacity and your resources grow, both in terms of people and money. But yeah, I think kind of acknowledging, knowing where you're headed is important, but you don't necessarily have to have all, 3 or 4 years yet if you're in a different place than you guys are. Because I think you can do that when you have a lot more of the pieces stabilized and you're not sort of in a transition phase too.
Good. Thank you.
Last question for you, Andrew. So one thing I've noticed is that building out this law firm, it's come with, you're compounding the stress of the trial practice, which is already stressful enough and risky enough, with the stress of being an entrepreneur and building a business, trying to handle that personally and then also live and enjoy your life. How do you balance those things and try to keep your wits about you and enjoy life a little bit?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think accepting that the concept of work-life balance, like a true 40 a week balance is a myth. To your point, we've attracted a lot of good people with an excellent job posting, and I'm proud of it. And it's quirky, and it's gonna turn a lot of people off, which is great because you're not a fit if it turns you off. But we've had the same response you've had, that the best people have been like, I wasn't looking, but I was intrigued. Is this really? It seems too good to be true. Are you really this way? Because it resonates with me. And one of those values is, like, you as a lawyer, you recognize that litigation and trial work requires longer nights, but longer vacations, longer hours and longer vacations. Like, it's just, if you're on trial, anyone who's done that work understands, and my wife does too, because it takes a village. It takes your whole family. Like, you have to know that's going to have an impact on, who's getting the kids to soccer, and I'm going to be in the office late. There's going to be unpredictability. And yeah, hopefully I'm going to be able to leave court and come home. But realistically, there's going to be a flurry of emotions we have to respond to. And you can do your best to be proactive. And after every trial, go back, because we do. Even if you win or lose, you go back, you post-mortem it. And how can we make that process better for our people too and less stressful? What could we do better? What could we get further out ahead of so that we're not here longer and avoid what is avoidable? But you have to acknowledge what isn't. And so to answer your question, some part of it is acknowledging that, giving yourself space to work hard when you have to. Like, the last 3 weeks, my wife has carried so much more in our family, and not possible without her in every way possible, but especially these last 3 weeks. I mean, I've been in the office till 11, 12, writing briefs around the clock in preparation for trial. And that's hard as a parent, to come home after your kids are in bed and leave before they're up. But yeah, I think, but making sure that you're maximizing the time that you do have. So, like, our case got bumped to April, actually. And I grabbed tickets for my son and I to go to the Yankees game tonight. So I'm going to pick him up at 2:00 and go do that. So it's like seizing on those opportunities that you do have, doing your best to compartmentalize, which can be hard, taking care of your mental health. But it's hard. And being honest about what your needs are, having a culture of honesty. So I can tell my COO, look, I'm at like a 2 right now. I need some help, or, we need more supports, and we need to hire, even if it's going to mean we're less profitable short term. If it provides sanity, we're going to do it. So that's sort of a bias too towards, we want to run a profitable law firm, but I am more than happy to compromise net profit percentage for sanity. And it all comes down to a balance there. So if you want to maximize money and mental health, I just think that's impossible. You got to pick one. And for me, it's what mental health is always going to win out, because number one, you're no good to anybody if you don't survive. And, also, it's just not a place people want to work if the core guiding principle is money. So I think seizing opportunities when you can get them, and being willing to make a little bit less money and have supports in place is really the best you can do.
I think that's a very wise set of advice, and hopefully people will internalize and take that to heart. Andrew, thank you so much for coming and sharing your experience with us here on our podcast. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks for listening to Elawvate, Build and Grow Your Law Firm. Share with colleagues if you found it valuable. Remember, building a successful law firm takes discipline, strategy, and determination. But you're not alone. Produced and powered by LawPods.